This video is going to deal with the film The One I Love and reveals intricacies of the plot. The One I Love was released through a marketing campaign that revealed almost nothing, so any mention of anything in the movie constitutes a spoiler in that sense. That said, the movie is currently available on Netflix streaming. If you do not want the film spoiled for you, I suggest watching it before viewing the rest of this video. With that spoiler warning out of the way, here is the plot of The One I Love in its entirety. Ethan and Sophie are a married couple that have been having some difficulties, the details of which we do not know at first. They are attending marriage counseling from a therapist who suggests they spend some time in a retreat at a large excluded estate. While there, both of them has an encounter in the guest cottage with the other one that rekindles the romance of their relationship, but in each case the other person does not remember this encounter. Upon further investigation, they discover that if each of them enters the guest cottage alone, they will be confronted by a doppelganger of the other one. They freak out at first and decide to leave, but Sophie is intrigued. They agree to go back after setting some ground rules. These ground rules are soon violated because Ethan becomes jealous of Sophie's bonding with his doppelganger. It is revealed that the discord of the marriage was caused by infidelity on Ethan's part. Ethan tricks Sophie by pretending to be his double and has sex with her. Then things get weirder when the doppelgangers show up in the main house, after being confined to the guest house all this time. The four have dinner together and Ethan's doppelganger reveals to Sophie how Ethan tricked her, making her feel hurt and betrayed. Ethan returns to the guest house where he finds a computer and voice files that show two people slowly being changed to sound increasingly more like himself and Sophie. He discovers that the more the two of them are driven apart by the doppelgangers, the more freedom they have and the more restriction he and Sophie have. Once he and Sophie are driven apart, the idea is for the doppelgangers to leave, replacing them. However, because his doppelganger has fallen in love with the real Sophie, he makes a deal with Sophie's doppelganger, who is in love with his doppelganger, to drive them apart. Sophie's doppelganger poses as the real Sophie so the real Ethan can talk to the real Sophie. When Ethan's doppelganger finds out the ruse, this leads to a confrontation. Ethan's doppelganger then tries to leave with Sophie but runs straight into a force field which knocks him out. Ethan realizes that he and Sophie can still leave and grabs one of the Sophies, who due to the ruse are dressed exactly the same. They pass the other Ethan still knocked out, with the other Sophie bent over him. When Sophie and Ethan are back home again, he is relieved, but then is puzzled when Sophie cooks bacon, something the real Sophie hated, but that Sophie's doppelganger had done for him in the guest house. The One I Love is often compared to the work of Charlie Kaufman, and there are similarities in how this movie uses science fiction and fantasy to explore a metaphor about how humans interact with each other. The metaphor that is attached to the scenario is an obvious one, but the film deals with it in a way that is ambiguous and invites a myriad of interpretations. The doppelgangers represent idealized forms of the couple from each other's perspective. Sophie says the other Ethan is a lot how Ethan used to be. This line of dialogue can be taken at face value, but probably isn't meant to be. There is an obvious question to be asked, and that question is, has Ethan changed or has Sophie changed? This is a question that obsesses the film's first half. We don't know that the marital problems are caused by Ethan's infidelity until later in the film, and this seems to be a conscious choice by the filmmakers. What we do know is that the doppelgangers have all the traits that they love about each other, minus those little things that drive them crazy about each other. The second group of traits may have been there since the beginning, but the newness of the relationship made them less apparent. When we watch Sophie slowly become infatuated with the new Ethan and slowly fall out of love with the old one, we are invited to see this as a metaphor for our current culture of serial monogamy. The idea may be that before Sophie and Ethan met each other, they both had in mind an idealized partner, and their attraction to each other corresponds to how well they each fit into the preconceived idea of the perfect partner. When Sophie stops connecting with Ethan, she seeks out a similar partner who is like Ethan used to be. But is he really like Ethan used to be, or is it because she has changed and her perspective has changed that creates this difference? Would the same thing happen with the second Ethan that occurred with the first and then result in the search for a third Ethan? As for Ethan, he has created the rift in the relationship because he severed the bond of trust by cheating. He scrambles to repair this bond, but it is notable that when he sees Sophie start to fall for his doppelganger, his instinct is to try to and win her back using deception. When Ethan is alone with the other Sophie, he tells her, "You aren't her, and you only remind me of what I am losing." He sees the other Sophie as an illusion, while Sophie sees the other Ethan as the person Ethan used to be. But the second Ethan is yet another deception, and it is because Ethan's deception she seeks him in the first place. Ethan fails to win Sophie back because he can't be honest with her. This fits the metaphor because it implies that the only way the relationship can survive will be by accepting each other for the people they truly are, and that seeking an idealized partner will only lead to a cycle of serial monogamy. The explanation element of the film is one that critics had the most problem with, and I will admit that on first viewing it made little sense to me. However, on a second viewing I found that it does serve a narrative purpose as well as a metaphoric one. What is implied in the film is that Ethan and Sophie will be trapped in the guest cottage once the doppelgangers have taken over their identities. This goes back to where the doppelgangers came from in the first place. It is implied that the previous couple who had been sent here had taken over the identities of Ethan and Sophie, and once they are trapped there, they will take the identity of the next couple. This provides a clear goal to the therapist's plans. Sophie and the second Ethan fall in love with each other, but the second Sophie and Ethan remain in love with their original partners. The idea behind sending the couple to the retreat is that they will either learn to rebuild their trust and communicate, or they will be trapped there. Once a couple is trapped, they can escape by literally becoming people they are not, and staying together at the expense of their individual identities. The ending also has multiple interpretations. The straightforward one is that Ethan chose the second Sophie unconsciously, even though he meant to choose the real Sophie. This says something about how we choose our partners, and our ability to be self-aware about how we choose our partners. Or Sophie is cooking bacon in order to make an effort to rekindle their relationship, which may imply that in order to have a sustainable relationship, we must make some compromises to our partner. At least this is how I see the movie. But there are many other interpretations that people can have, which is what makes The One I Love one of the more interesting films to come out in recent memory.